It's time to down tools for a bit. Welcome to the ToolShed, the influential podcast for anyone and everyone involved in the building industry. Here's your host, Mick Hawes.
Hey there, before we kick off, I want to share a really important thought. 71% of you who watch this channel frequently don't subscribe. So if you've enjoyed any video you've ever watched, can you do me a favor and hit the subscribe button? It helps the channel more than you think, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests get. So let's go. Hey folks, we're going to be talking about your favorite subject in this podcast, money. And there's all sorts of challenges in the way we think about money, the way we feel about money. And so in this episode, I've got Tara Saxon. She's a certified money coach and has been doing this sort of thing for quite some time. And it's obviously a topic that everybody can get a lot of value out of because it's can be like money stress can be some of the most challenging stress that there is. And for me, money stress is almost like an amplifier. If you've got some other sort of problems going on in your life and you've got some money stress as well, it tends to amplify those problems. So we're going to get stuck into that. Before we do, just wanted to remind you to take the Builders Freedom Readiness Scorecard. The link is in the description and it'll take you about 2 minutes and it'll give you in your inbox shortly thereafter some really cool information that's going to help you identify what are some of the things that you could be shifting or focusing your attention on to get a little bit more freedom. And that could be money freedom. So we're going to be talking about that today. But it also is time freedom and a level of emotional freedom as well. So eliminating a lot of the unnecessary stress out of your business. So it's a really good investment of a couple of minutes. So jump in there after you've finished listening to this episode. Tara, there you are. Welcome to the podcast. This is a very exciting topic for some people. And as I mentioned in the intro, I think that money is kind of something that can be measured, but it can also cause problems, and it can be quite distressful depending on your situation from time to time. But my first question always is, how did you end up getting into this? Like, what was the scenario? What happened in your life that got you focused in on becoming a money coach and going down the track of understanding the psychology behind it and all of that?
Thanks, Mick. Yeah, great question. Originally, actually, I started my career in banking and finance. So I worked for the big Australian banks, some of the big international banks, and my job there was very much around selling debt because ultimately that's actually what banks do. That's how they make money. And even though I actually had, uni degrees, postgrad degrees, and I worked in the industry for about 15 years, I actually didn't understand how it related to my own life. And I had, now I look back on it, really poor money management skills. So I carried on earning big dollars and selling debt for a really long time. And when I stopped working, which was actually when my kids were born, everything fell apart for me. So my financial house of cards, collapsed very spectacularly. And I had to rebuild my wealth and my identity after that. And it took quite a long time. But everything I learned through that, I basically pulled together and I thought, I don't want to go back to that industry where I sold people into debt. I offered the debt products. So how can I build on the shoulders of my former career, help people to overcome those challenges, remove that stress, and ultimately give themselves more options and choices? So that's what I did. I ended up retraining and I built a business a few years ago. And it's just wonderful. I love it. It's a much, much better way to use my skills in a way that helps elevate lives.
Yeah. And that's what we're all about too. It's about improving people's lives. And you see the certain lending institutions, particularly the sort of short-term type ones where the interest rates are incredibly high. And if you miss a payment, it just completely gets out of control and people can get in a downward spiral with it. But I'd really like to get into and dive deep into the thought process and perhaps some ineffective or destructive beliefs that people have around money and how we get pushed around by our need for status and ego and all of that sort of stuff. I remember many years ago, back in the day where I was living the dream selling life insurance. Whenever I say that, everyone gets very envious, because everyone wants to sell life insurance. And I actually did it. But one thing I remember about that, because you'd go and visit people in their homes, and this is sort of back in the very late 80s, early 90s, and this was up in New South Wales when I was living up there, and you go and visit people in their homes, and their homes were quite flash and had a couple of really nice cars parked out the front. But you go into the house and they didn't have furniture, or didn't really even look like it. They lived there. They didn't seem to have food in the cupboard and all of that. They had everything that looked good externally, but I don't know that they were living such a great life. So what have you discovered in your journey about this thing, the psychology around money and status and ego and all of that sort of stuff, because it can certainly lead us down the wrong path?
Oh, look, you're absolutely right. And you nailed it. There are so many people who are focused on creating that external impression of status and wealth, or even just that they've got it all together when it comes to money. And when we actually begin to peel back the layers, quite often it's completely untrue. A lot of people are caught up with keeping up with the Joneses, even though the Joneses don't really seem to notice, don't really seem to care. But
Who are these
I
Jones
think
people?
and where do they get off, not
Yeah,
paying attention when we buy that,
exactly.
that massive ute and all the toys. So, ultimately money is really deeply linked to our identity. And you said it before as we were beginning this chat that money touches everything, and it's so central to what we need to survive as humans that it's fundamental to what we do, and yet so few people understand it. And what we know to be true now from the perspective of, psychology and neuroeconomics is that we establish our money patterns before usually the age of 12, usually between the ages of 7 and 12. Things have happened in our lives and we've experienced them through the eyes of a child. And then we go out into the world, and when we have certain situations pop up, our subconscious money patterns, those ones that, 8-year-old us decided or took on board, play out on autopilot. And what we don't realize is these money patterns are running the show for us. And until either we have a spectacular crash like I did, or we get to a certain age where perhaps wisdom and life experience taps us on the shoulder, most of us just carry on running those patterns right throughout our life, our adult years, and then our middle-aged years, and then our senior years. And so those examples you used, people buying these nice cars and having houses perhaps they can't afford, comes back to something usually that happened when they were younger that's caused them to respond in a way that if I create that external perspective that I've got it all together, then maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I can hide. These sorts of things come up, and it'll be different for different people because the origin of that pattern is going to be unique to each person's childhood experience. But the work that I do is actually helping to uncover what's going on with those patterns. Where did they come from? How do we reveal those patterns? How do we repair them? And then how do we reclaim our sovereignty as an intentional adult who actually uses money to get where we're trying to get to intentionally and very, clearly, and with a systematic kind of strategy behind it.
So where do you think we need to start in the conversation? Because again, going back to those glory days selling life insurance, I got into the detail, into the intimacy of their financial situation. So I knew how much they earned, and I knew what their expenses were, because we were trying to figure out what's the best thing to do here for protection and being able to, get a little bit more back in control with money. And it just seemed to be that as people got pay rises and were promoted and what have you, that the expenses just sort of kept in touch with the income. There's so many opportunities as you get a pay rise or get a promotion. It's not as if your life has to change so much if you had a good life and then you're getting more money, why do we now need to add more expenses to it? So how do you address that? What's the first thing that you sort of get into a deep conversation with people about?
Yeah, absolutely, Mick. It's a really good point, and to use a bit of a builder's analogy, money's a bit like expanding foam.
Mm.
It will actually fill up the space. Whatever the space is that you give it, it will fill up, right? So what we do see, exactly as you're saying, is as promotions happen or a new job, new income, all of a sudden, oh, I deserve it is usually a pattern. Oh, I deserve it. I've gotten a new job and I might have a credit card that I haven't paid off yet. I still do owe money on that house that we're living in, but you know what? It's time to upgrade the cars, or it's time to go on a cruise and stuff like that. So it is definitely a pattern, a very, very common pattern. And again, this comes back to using something on an external facing stage to make ourselves somehow feel better or safer, and to soothe those experiences that obviously happened when we were younger. So to answer your question, what do we do? How do we begin to unpack it? The very first step is actually an awareness that you're doing these things on autopilot. And so what a part of that first step is really asking the question, what are your money goals? And when I ask people this question, they almost every single person will just have this blank look on
Blank
their face,
face.
like, what?
Yeah.
Because
Money
I mean,
goals.
money goals, yeah. I mean, some of us set goals, like as in smart goals, goals for income, maybe in our business, goals for things we want to achieve with our families. But so few people actually stop and say, well, what are my money goals? And sometimes it's about having a certain amount of money in the bank account, certain amount of savings, certain amount of super, but it can even be bigger than that. It can be, I want to get to a point where, maybe in my 50s, if I don't want to keep working this job 5 days a week by then, I can do it 3. Well, then we go backwards and we say, well, what do we need to do now to get to that point? So, money coaching is more than dollars and cents. It is actually about mindset, and it's about identity. And so that process of setting those money goals brings a level of awareness, brings a level of focus that very few people have ever had. And it can be a little bit jarring at first, because it's like, why have I gotten to the age of 37, 45, 62, and I've never thought of this stuff? The oldest client I've worked with, actually, she was 74, and we did huge amount of work, and she was thrilled, but she was like, I got to 74 and I've never really dug into this stuff. So it's quite universal.
I think, and I want your experience on this as well, that specificity is really important. And what I mean by that is so in Black Belt, I'm a big proponent, a big fan of Mike Michalowicz and Profit First. We teach it within the group, and it had such a profound effect on my life. Like I had a previous podcast, and I met Mike when I was interviewing him about the Pumpkin Plan, which is an awesome book. I think one of 12 or 13 that he's got now. And then he reached out to me again shortly after that and said, I got a new book coming out. Can I come back on the podcast to promote it? And I said, yeah, sure. And I read it just so I could ask smart questions. But I read the book, and I was so disgusted in my inability to understand my financial situation. It was just awful. But I guess I needed to have that horrible experience like you mentioned in your intro, where you go slap, 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 what are you doing? But what I've found with that is people don't have any specificity on their financial situation, particularly businesses. They use a profit and loss and all of that. And most people look at it and they just look at the figure and they go, oh, happy days, but they don't even know what they're looking at, and it's not right anyway. Like, it's all fiction. At least Profit First, you look in the bank account and however much is there. And it changes your default decision-making process. And so I'm assuming that is something that you do. You get into specificity, and rather than just talking logic, you somehow get the emotions involved to improve people's decision-making.
Absolutely. I mean, I love Mike's books, and he's brilliant, and he's changed a lot of lives. And I'm actually a little bit in awe that you've had him on your podcast so many times, because he really is. His work is very, very powerful. And what you just touched on then, was about logic. And, something that I always find myself saying is you can't logic your way out of an emotional pattern.
No.
So when it comes to money, so much of what is going on is emotional and it's deep. It's really deeply rooted. And so when you spoke just a minute ago about, and the word you used was disgust, when you peeled back that layer or peeked under the hood and went, oh my goodness, this is what I've been doing. And you felt that sense of disgust. That is a really big one, because we have to do this work without shame, because if we pack shame onto these emotional patterns and ripples that are going on under the surface, it's actually going to usually get worse. So the work I do is about, I always say, it's no spreadsheets, no shame, and that's not completely true, because there are spreadsheets, but they're really fun ones.
Yeah.
But it's actually
never
about,
heard of that before, a fun spreadsheet.
I think I might have even called them sexy at one point, but they are spreadsheets. But we've got to do it without shame. We've got to recognize that we are where we are because we've been where we've been. But from this point onward, we're going to do things with intention.
Right.
That's I think that's the key.
But I keep coming back to the specificity, because you said, what are your money goals? And people go, what money goals? What are you talking about? And like over my journey, business coaching, I also sort of had a bit of a off to the left hand side go at performance coaching in elite sport as well. In cricket, in and in tennis, and even in footy. And there were just these examples that I remember that increased the accuracy of these talented people by changing the target that they were aiming for from something that was this big to something that was this big. So like tennis players were using a hula hoop as a target, and I got a $2 coin and put it inside the hula hoop, and I said, you hit the money, it's yours, and I'll keep putting the money in. And these were kids. And just by doing that, changing the target from a hula hoop size to a $2 coin size, the accuracy and consistency was crazy. And I'm just wondering how much detail you get into the specificity of helping people really to identify what their financial goals are, because the other part of that is so many people could be doing okay financially, but they can't answer the question, how much is enough? So their answer to their goals is more, and it's like, that'll ruin you, that'll wreck you. Like that, there has to be an objective, in my opinion.
Oh, and look, I share that opinion. How much is enough is a big one, and it's a really good point. And before we get into actually setting goals, what I always encourage people to do is actually to stop and consider your personal values. Because if you're not clear, and to rank them in order of most important down to, probably usually I say the top 5 and then the next 5, so the top 10 in total, personal values, and really dig into those. And if you're in a relationship or a family situation, it's a good idea to do that with the other people that are kind of decision makers with you, and to look at what are your values, and then begin to set goals that are aligned with those values. Because if you've got a really high value personally on freedom, then working in a job that chains you to a desk where you're going to do it 5 days a week until the day you retire probably isn't going to meet that core goal of freedom. And so before we get into, and I agree with you, highly specific goals, we've first got to ask ourselves the question, what actually really matters? What motivates me? And how is this going to resonate? Because if you're going to start a business and you're going to work 80-hour weeks and you're going to, be absolutely nose to that grindstone, then you'd better be damn sure that one of your key goals or key values rather is around the financial output or the impact or whatever it is that business is going to produce. Because really, if what you actually crave and is a really important value for you is flexibility and freedom and spontaneity, then that model is going to clash and it's never going to work. So before we get into the specificity around how much, by when, what is it that we're trying to achieve, what are the action steps we're going to take to achieve them, we go one level above that and hover over a question of what are your values, what really matters. And once we've got clear on that, then to dig into those goals, then to dig into the specifics of them, the action plan, and then the steps to achieve them. That then gets us to a point where we're actually working towards something we really believe in.
Yeah. It's so important. I mean, it's something that I've seen in my experience too much of, and that's why I want to talk about it, and I talk about it often, is really doing what you just said. Like, what the bloody hell are we doing this for? What's the purpose? Because I've had so many experiences, and I've mentioned it on this podcast a number of times before, and people will get sick of it, but it had such a profound impact on me. Sitting with a friend who has now passed away, and he died quite early, like far too early, compared to where, how long he should have lasted. And he had more money that we could all spend in 10 lifetimes. And I was sitting on a multi-million-dollar boat with him, and he's absolutely distraught and just beside himself with grief because of how his relationship with his family had turned out, because he'd put all this time and energy in to the business, and we're sitting on this beautiful boat, and he had beautiful homes all over the place. And it impacted his health because he died way too young, and he died with massive regret.
Mm-hmm.
But, he was a sort of person, if you didn't know him personally and didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, and that's kind of how I had the relationship with him, because I was trying to help with time management and balance and all of that sort of stuff when I first met him, and then we became great friends. But having that more attitude and not having an understanding of what is really important, and that's what just burns me, is most people don't understand that until they get to the point of regret. Like, it's a bit too late then if your kids have already grown up. Like, you can't get that time over again.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly if it impacts your health, and distress has to impact your health significantly. So, it's so important to do that. How do you do that? Like, people listening to this, what do they need to start thinking about? Because people just, in left to their own devices, don't think too terribly deeply, until the shit hits the fan, and then it's like, regret or victim or whatever it might be. What do you get them to start to think about and unpack before it's too late?
That's a great question, and I think there's been a number of really great books written, and I'm thinking things like Atomic Habits by James Clear, about how do we change our habits, because our culture really has got a lot of us living and reacting on autopilot right from a young age, like the decisions that we make about the kind of career we might go into, or the trade, or whatever it is we do when we finish school, and how we just kind of fall into this and we fall into that, and we distract ourselves with all this dopamine. We're scrolling, we're video games, and doing a lot of that kind of stuff that just feeds that dopamine, and that's kind of comfortable. And so to get uncomfortable and say, what am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? Is this making me happy? Is there an absence of joy? Like, am I observing that there's an absence of joy in my life? Like, these are really uncomfortable questions. And as you say, it usually takes a major health crisis or loss of a job or another kind of massive event that brings that into sharper focus. But I think what we've got to start doing is treating our money life like the way we treat, our teeth. Like, if you've got a broken tooth, you're going to go to a dentist, right? You're going to at least give it some focus, give it some thought. You've got a vehicle that, the brakes are going. You're going to stop and you're going to consider your options. And you're going to get that looked at. For some reason, money is so fundamental to what we do, and yet it often is an afterthought. And the point you just made, it's often that people are being reactive when it comes to how they deal with their money. So again, it's about the awareness. The awareness comes first. And I would love your listeners who are hearing this today to just stop and say, maybe it really matters about what I'm doing with my money. And when I say money, it's more than dollars and cents. It's fulfillment, it's joy, it's career progression, it's the impact you're going to make with the work that you do. So it's how we earn our money, how we spend our money, and how we invest our money, and how those three parts of our money story come together to actually form a fundamental layer of our identity and our legacy.
The word deservedness just came into my mind. Is that something that you have discussions with? Because it's something that I hear in people's words and their vocabulary, and obviously that's reflecting their beliefs, which impacts their decisions. And they could be in a very different financial situation, but there's this, I don't know, it's a deservedness issue. They don't feel like that they deserve to be comfortable or wealthy or whatever the word might be. Is that something that you have conversations with
Oh,
or about?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of language that we hear when we're younger can really be quite pervasive. And
Mm.
so we might have heard things like, you don't deserve that, or who do you think I am? Rockefeller, money doesn't grow on trees,
Eh,
these sorts of cliches and throwaway lines that we hear, they embed quite deeply.
mm,
And also a sense of what's fair and just. And again, these are patterns that we're establishing before the age of 12. So we're looking at the world through the lens of a child and what a child thinks is fair or what a child thinks they, to your point, deserve. And so how we then go into our lives thinking, and it might have just been a tiny little thing that happened. I worked with a client recently, and she was saying that when she was younger, she had gone to grab something in a shop. The family used to own this shop, and they'd sold the shop. And she was really young. I think she was like 7, and she picked something up, not intending to take it, but to ask her grandmother, who she was with, "Can we buy this?" And the grandmother said, "We don't own this shop anymore. Those lollies and snacks like that are not yours anymore, and you're not to grab things, and you're not to take things." And she put it back, but she was deeply ashamed
mm,
because she hadn't been able to articulate where she was going with it, what she was intending to do with it, but also that shame around taking what she thought was hers for the taking. So to that
mm,
point on deservedness, this poor woman had such a scrambled internal message about what she was worthy of. And it affected her identity, it affected her earning capacity, it affected her whenever money came in, she would get rid of it really quickly, whether she would spend it, she would be overly generous with it. So this is the pattern you're talking about, this do I deserve this? And it can play out in a number of different ways, but often that comes back to a root of potentially shame or feeling unworthy. So it's a huge one, definitely, Mick. Yeah,
mm.
definitely. Mm.
The opposite side of the coin to that, and maybe it's a deservedness issue, but I deserve it, but maybe not. It was more triggered by a word you used, the dopamine hit and the scrolling and all of that sort of stuff. And it's something that really grinds my gears that in this day and age, because of all of that sort of stuff, there is this incredible bright, shiny object syndrome, quick fix, all of that sort of stuff. And what sort of conversations or expectations have you come across where you're talking to people about money and they obviously want to be more financially or financially better off, but when it comes to discipline and work, not so much, can you show me the quick way of doing it? Like, can I do it? Can you? It's almost like asking what's the donut that I can eat and to lose weight. It kind of doesn't exist. There's discipline, there's time, there's you've got to sacrifice, and you kind of pay now to benefit later. In my world, you've got to pay at some stage, and you can pay with discipline now and enjoy it later, or you can kind of take it easy now, but you'll be paying for the rest of your life. Would be my thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, and to use your analogy, paying when that kitty is dry, when
Yeah.
you've got nothing left to draw on. So that spontaneous, frivolous, you only live once kind of mentality where the spending is driving that dopamine, and it gets quite addictive, and it can be actually quite a tricky one to break.
Mm,
But your point about discipline is a great one. And again, this is where the traditional approach of budget harder, save, 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 that kind of like old school approach to money is not really working these days, because again, that comes back to, trying to logic your way out of emotional patterns. Until we actually embrace the reasons for that discipline and we're conscious that what we're planning is coherent, it's strategic, it's aligned with our goals and values. It actually is very clear for us. Back to your point before about specificity, we know why we're doing it because we know where it's going to get us. And we know that when we get to that point, that's aligned with our vision for ourselves and our lives and our legacy and our family. And it's also harmonious with our values, our personal values. Then suddenly, budgeting doesn't feel like discipline so much as freedom, because it's actually equipping us to get to where it is that we very intentionally claimed we want to get to. And so when we add this layer of emotional awareness and gentleness, if you will, around how it feels, we can actually get to a place where it's not a rigid discipline, but rather it's a set. It's basically like barricades that gets us going on a lane to where it is that we want to head to, and all of a sudden, that's when it starts to click.
Reward also. In your mind, what part does that play? Because I know in the profit first philosophy, it's important that part of the profit sort of every 90 days is spent on something, which like from an accountant's point of view, they all run away in shock horror. What are you doing? Why did you buy that electric skateboard? Or I just bought a new drone yesterday. but part of how this works, profit first in any case, is that you need to reward yourself. You need to do something with part of the money that, as Mike told me, puts a shit-eating grin on your face. And it doesn't need to make sense. And probably if somebody else says, "Oh, that was a bit of a waste of money," you've probably done the right thing, because it's just there to make you feel good and create that neuro association to following the process of profit first. And to me, it's really important because and I use this probably inappropriate analogy these days, but you throw the stick for the dog and the dog comes back all happy and drops the stick at your feet and you kick it in the ribs. Every so you do that a few times and the dog probably won't chase the stick anymore. And I just figure that if people do the discipline thing and the sacrifice thing, and they just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and there's no reward at any stage, I just don't know whether it's sustainable. What are your thoughts on all of that?
I think you know an awful lot about this. I think maybe hanging out with Mike Mikhailovich has got you pretty switched on this topic, Nick, because you're spot on. It's if we end up being overly rigid with our approach to money, then ultimately it's, as you say, not sustainable, but also it can really push us. Like a lot of people especially people who have some issues financially, can then get control, and then they can swing really far towards like over control and become quite miserly. A bit like the classic Scrooge. I often describe like a picture of like a dragon sitting on like a big pile of gold, and it's like, "Stay away, I have my gold." A little bit like how you were describing that chap before with the big boat, like he's there and he's got the boat, he's got all the shiny things, but he's got no one to share it with.
Yeah.
And so we can really swing that far. So what I always talk to clients about is, how are you going to celebrate when you hit that goal, that mini goal? How do we break like a big long-term goal down into manageable chunks so that along the way you're rewarding yourself for staying on the course, but you're also not getting overwhelmed with how much you've got ahead of you, and just, not I suppose necessarily dropping that dopamine spike in there, but giving ourselves ways to pat ourselves on the back. And so often when it comes to couples, I say, it's a really good idea to sit down and talk about your progress. And if it's a big debt you're paying off, charting it so that every time you put a cross through another, block of $5,000 that you've paid down on that, you can actually acknowledge it, you can celebrate it, and you can be aware that you're on track toward that goal that you're ultimately aiming for. So you're right. It won't be sustainable if we just try and be a Navy SEAL about it. I mean, we're not here for like overly rigid systems that feel like you're wearing someone else's boots. Again, coming back to those goals being set with a vision of where we're heading long term, what our values are, why that's important, why we actually really want to stay the course, why we want to stick to this plan. And so when it's not someone else's objectives, but it's yours yourself, you've mapped it against your values, you know how it aligns with your short-term, your medium-term, and your long-term vision for your life, then it doesn't necessarily feel, like it's been imported and dropped on your shoulders and you've just got to respond. And so having those little ways to celebrate milestones along the way, and it doesn't need to be, something fancy that then breaks the budget. It could be as simple as, we're going to get a coffee and sit by the beach and just, acknowledge the fact that we took a chunk of that mortgage and we smashed it. It can be something simple like that.
Yeah. You mentioned debt and I think that's something that we need to unpack as well, because having had discussions with accountants and people who love spreadsheets, that you might have, say, 3 or 4, 5 different debts, and the accountant's version of how to pay that debt off is look at the one that's sort of eating you the most, and which we need to put that one to bed first, because that you're going to save more money by getting rid of that. And that's not necessarily the case profit first philosophy wise, because it again, everything profit first always seems to be focused on emotion, and it's so important to have a win, and if you've got a debt that's going to take you 7 years to get rid of versus one that might take you 5 months, and the 7-year one makes more mathematical sense to get rid of, profit first would always dictate go with the one you can tick the box with first, because it's like we won, like you just said. Same sort of deal with that reward when you paid a little bit off your home or what have you. What's your advice with that? How do you what do you talk to people about when it comes to debt, and whether they should have any or whether they should develop a hatred of it? What do you say?
Well, I don't think anyone should have a hatred of anything. In this process, it's actually about looking at what makes sense and what actually fits long term. And so my personal preference, if it were my decision, would be, as you say, getting a quick win, getting a small debt and just smashing it. But again, it comes back to every individual having a completely different makeup in terms of what motivates them. So you might be the kind of person who, when we work out your values and we look into what really makes you tick, for you, it might be like, I've really got to get my cash flow to a better position. And so that debt that's like 18%, we have just got to get rid of that one, even if it's going to take longer, because maybe their cash flow situation, that's important. Someone else who perhaps has got more of that skew towards the dopamine hit and the quick wins and really needs that encouragement and motivation, for sure. Then in that situation, getting rid of that smallest one first so that they can feel that sense of accomplishment would probably be the better way to go. But is debt always inherently evil and bad? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think it depends on what you're actually using it for. And I sort of sometimes it still blows my mind. And I was exactly the same. So it's said with no judgment. But sometimes clients don't realize that debt to buy an asset that's going to appreciate is logical, and debt to buy an asset that's going to depreciate is not necessarily a very good use of your money, unless, of course, there's some tax benefits, but that's sort of outside the scope of that immediate conversation. Yep. So, spending on credit cards for consumer goods, like spending on luxury items, excessive holidays and, degustation dinners on, rooftops in Sydney Harbour, maybe isn't the best use of your money if you're going into debt for that. So that's probably something we need to look at in terms of where's that coming from and why are you motivated to do that, as opposed to what I call kind of more sensible debt that's actually going to generate income or is going to give you that sense of security, perhaps in terms of your principal place of residence and that kind of thing. So debt is not always inherently bad, but usually people emotionally feel better when they get out of it. Yeah. And getting out of consumer debt first is usually what we focus on. Although I must just specify, I don't sort of look at, I'm not sort of like a debt restructuring specialist, though I do have experience in that. But we usually look at getting rid of that consumer debt first, and then any vehicles or assets that they are using perhaps to get to work or for income generating purposes. And then we look at the home loan. But each step along the way, they start to feel better about themselves and own that identity as a person who is in control of their money, who makes wise and considered financial decisions. So once we've gotten rid of consumer debt and vehicles and things like that, we get to the point where they're really comfortable with their home loan. And then we start to look at, well, how can you invest for the future? Because a lot of people actually, again, this comes back to financial literacy, think if I can just pay my home off, then I'm set for life. And in actual fact, unless you've got a really healthy super balance, and the average numbers that we hear from the tax office of people's super balances aren't that flash in Australia still today, you're going to have a pretty meager existence in retirement if you don't get smart now about how you're going to invest for the future. So that might be adding to your super fund. It might be doing other investments that suit your own personal circumstances so that you're actually generating wealth, generational wealth potentially, or just wealth that'll carry you through to that, third chapter, fourth chapter of your life in some modicum of style.
Mm. Yeah, 100% right. And it's something that we've experienced along the journey as well. Like before Profit First, we had a big mortgage on a home and had the 30-year term and all that sort of stuff. And you're looking into the future, and it was almost felt like, it's going to take the 30 years to pay it off, just the way we were going, because everything was on the never. Like, this is going back a bit. It was a fax machine. That was on an asset purchase. All the cars were. It was just ridiculous. And then we implemented Profit First, and I'm going to say 3 years after we implemented it, we were completely debt free and owned the house, and we ended up getting some other property and what have you. But then we got rid of it all, so we were debt free, like mortgage free. And you're exactly right. It's like it felt good, but we couldn't retire. Like you can't eat the bricks on your house. Like you've got to have some sort of income. It doesn't really matter whether you own it or not. And now talking about the debt, we've got plenty of it. But we've got a wealth coach, and that's what I want to sort of finish up the discussion focusing on is the importance of that. And like I understand it, but I'd love your thoughts on it, because to me it's like Roger Federer had a coach. He was the best in the world. Greg Norman, best in the world, had a coach. Like that, there are the top athletes around the place never consider going into competition without a coach. And money's kind of important. And it's like you've got other stuff to deal with. You're running a business, or you've got a job, or blah, 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 blah. Like it just makes so much sense to have someone who knows about this stuff to help you with it. Because, you might think that everything that I've said in this podcast means that I know a bit about it. Well, why have I got a financial coach? Why have I got a wealth coach? And every time, and it's a team of people that he's got, for different specialist areas. And every time they talk about them or talk with them, it's like, I don't know shit. Like I really don't. It's like you've got to have these people who are, it's their focus and their job to be constantly, what's the best way of doing this now? And now that's changed, and this law has changed, and that approach has changed. How do we do it now? And it's like you don't have the bandwidth to do that if you're running a business and all that sort of stuff. So I've kind of given you the answer, but how important is a coach?
It's a great point. And, high performing executives have executive coaches.
Yeah.
People running, really well established restaurants, have an executive chef that comes in, from time to time and gives them the inside scoop, because we can't all be specialists at everything. Like if you're busy, if you're an electrician and you're busy running that, you know everything there is to know about power, but you don't necessarily know how you could potentially be smarter and start getting your business to work for you, or start making investments that mean you can get off the tools at a certain future point, And I think that the point that you make is a really good one, because things have elevated for you since you started working with a coach. And
Yeah.
I think there's a few aspects of it that are probably just worth touching on. That person's going to have knowledge, specialist knowledge that you perhaps don't have, definitely. But it's also the rigor and to use the word we used before, discipline, to come back to it, whether you're meeting with them, weekly, fortnightly, maybe even it's a monthly arrangement, but to have that period each month or so where you come back and you go, oh, we're going to dig into this today because I booked the damn appointment. I better turn up, but you're going to turn up and you're going to get something really insightful out of that experience. And so then for that next, fortnight or month until you meet with them again, you're actually going to focus your energy on that, and you're going to start making decisions that are cognizant of that. You're going to start making decisions that are aligned with, the goals that you've just set, or the goals that you continue to revisit and you continue to focus on. And it's that series of small decisions that you're making from day to day. Literally some of what might seem like the smallest of decisions that are going to pile up over time. And that's what's going to change the trajectory as to whether you have an average, mediocre kind of outcome, or if you're on a trajectory that's going to see you being able to hit those goals, those lifestyle goals, those financial goals, to create whatever that future is that you've very carefully and specifically nominated. And so, apart from that specialist knowledge they bring, just the reminder to constantly be coming back and revisiting it and have that discipline that the other stuff that's going on in life's not going to knock you off course, not going to get you distracted, but you're going to come back to that with intention and regularity until you get to that point where you are achieving your goals. Yeah.
Mm. And I think also people need to have a level of commitment and understanding that, like, if you've got a wealth coach, a money coach, a financial coach, they're a coach. And it's like, if they're your swim coach, they don't jump into the pool and do the laps for you. Like, you've got to get into the pool and do the laps. And our wealth coach spoke to the black belt group when we first hooked up. And one of the things he talked about is have you got a scheduled time block or two every week to, or effectively work on your financial fitness?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it works the same as everything else. Just because you've got a coach doesn't mean anything. You've still got to do the work. Like, you can have a personal trainer. You've still got to lift the weights and do the stuff. And I think you just see so many people wishing for a better financial future to improve their financial situation, but they do not block out 1 minute to learn about financial intelligence, financial IQ, financial fitness. You've still got to do the work, but you have a coach to direct you into what work you need. At the end of the day, the coach doesn't make the decisions for you. You've got to take responsibility for your own financial wherewithal. They're kind of just a guide and a supporter and all of that sort of stuff. So what's the conversations you have around that? Like, people have to put time aside to get better with this stuff.
Well, they do, Mick. They absolutely do, because as I said earlier on in this chat, it really comes down to identity. And so no one is going to be able to shape or reshape or mold or change your identity over time apart from yourself. And so getting that that relationship happening so that you become aware, having that awareness, having that focus, doing the work, which sometimes can feel quite uncomfortable because it's that awkward feeling of growth that you're experiencing, but to recognize that you're leveling up and that your identity is shifting. And almost all of us start this work being a person who's feeling scared, anxious, worried, afraid of money, maybe, or maybe just where we're going with our money. And by doing the work, we actually change that around. So instead of, disgusted, which you said before, or those feelings of shame that we also talked about, like in that example of the girl when she was young, we're actually starting to feel powerful. We're starting to feel in control. We're not daunted anymore, but rather we're saying, like, a bill comes in and we say, oh, yep, I knew you were coming. I'm not phased. I've got money put aside for that. We get the rates notice when it comes in the post. It's always quite a big bill, but we go, yeah, no worries. We knew that was coming. We've had money put aside from that the whole time. So suddenly, instead of that reactive, fearful, anxious feeling, we're powerful, we're in control, and nothing's going to phase us. So that's the identity shift that we're looking for. And to your point earlier, it is about quick wins that can help make little dents in that identity. So we can say, oh yeah, it's working. Actually, this is actually working. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep going, leveling up and rounding out that identity to a person who actually genuinely believes they're a good custodian of money. And that's what we're aiming for. And it's not taught in school. And most families don't teach this to each other because usually those generations above us, they're not real good at it either. So we've really got to intentionally bring that awareness in the form of usually a coach, often the books alone, and sitting down with a spreadsheet and trying to shoehorn your way into someone else's budget isn't really going to cut it. But to get that awareness, to have that emotional connection to the process, to actually have your own values and ambition and goals created and crafted your own way so they feel truly your own, so you can own them. So even when the going gets tough, you're not going to fall off course. You're not going to fall off the wagon. You're not going to just throw in the towel. But that's where that identity shift happens. And we step into a more expansive, much, much more powerful, a much more calm and centered approach to our money, which ultimately is what we all want. It's just that a lot of us can't feel that feeling because it's so foreign and we're so busy being scrambled in the day-to-day of that reactivity.
So somebody listening to this going, they're probably right, and they're after some help. What's the best way to reach out to you? Once they do reach out to you, what's the experience they can expect to have? What are the steps?
Thanks, Mick. That's I appreciate you asking me that. So there's a few ways that we can work together. I have a group money coaching program that I run every quarter, and it's a lovely, group where we work through this stuff together. Some people would rather do it on a one-on-one basis, and so I've got like a full 90-day reset program that I do with clients on that basis. That's just one-on-one, and we meet every week for 12 weeks, and we really go deep, and we completely rewrite our relationship with money. So that's for people who are really game to roll up their sleeves and dig in. But for anyone who just wants to dip a toe in, I do an event every quarter, and it's completely free, and it always will be. And it's an hour-long session where we all just jump on a call, and I call it Reflect and Rise. So we reflect on the quarter that's been, and then we rise to the quarter that's just commencing. And so it's a quiet journaling activity where I ask some really intentionally crafted questions to really get you thinking and really get you asking yourself what on earth it is that you're doing with money. And it can be quite an aha moment for a lot of people when they realize that they've been very reactive and not really very clear on planning. But a part of what I give everybody who comes to that event is I give them a planner, and it just comes via email, and it allows them to fully map out the quarter ahead. What are they aiming for? What are their goals? What are the steps they're going to take? So when they come back to the next session, if they come back, which most of them do, the next quarter, they get to answer a different set of questions, but answer them and perhaps feel a little bit more powerful each time. So all of that info is on my website, and I'd love to see some of your audience come along to any of those events, depending on how deep they want to go into this work at this time.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for coming and being on the podcast and sharing your knowledge and your expertise. And it's just really cool, which is what we do most of the time in this podcast, is to meet people who are out there endeavouring to improve other people's lives. And the key with that is you're a specialist in that space. So it's really, really great to know that there are people out there that understand the problem. One of the things that was going through my mind when you said, this bill comes and you didn't expect it and all that sort of stuff, the thing that makes me laugh the most is people having that reaction to the BAS. How are we going to pay the BAS? It's like, well, it happens about 4 times a year. Pretty much the same day.
Yeah. It's like, a bit like Christmas. It's like people having a panic going, I don't know how I'm going to afford Christmas. I'm like, you knew it was coming when it was going to come, So yeah, but that's
not
the
like
intentionality.
Your car breaking down.
No, not at all. No, thanks so much for having me. I've loved it. Thanks, Mick. Lovely to chat.
That's great. Hopefully we'll be talking again sometime in the future. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Something to think about. As we said at the start, it's the money stress, if you're kind of out of whack with it, can create other problems, whether it's health, whether it's relationships, whether it's, time pressure, whatever. And you've also got financial pressure. It just seems to amplify the consequences of every other problem that you have, and when you can get that money stress under control, and you've got a clear plan. And that's something that you need to think about as well, because even just by having a plan, like so you go and you jump on Tara's session or have a conversation with her and you end up with a plan, you can instantly exhale and go, okay, I've got a plan. Nothing's changed. You're still in a shit spot and you're still in debt and all that sort of stuff, but I've got a plan. And that's just the first step, and it's profoundly powerful. So I encourage you to reach out and have the conversation. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't done the Builders Freedom Readiness Scorecard, the link is in the description. Take 2 minutes and do that. It will be absolutely worthwhile. The value you will get in your inbox shortly thereafter will definitely be a great return on investment. We will be back with another episode of the ToolShed podcast. Before you know it, I'm Mick Hawes from Builders Business Black Belt. That is all. I am out. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the ToolShed. If this podcast struck a chord with you, make sure you spread the word by sharing it with your mates in the building industry. We love your help to make the building industry better for everyone involved.